So next up we've got Hadden. Now Ian has snuck in a little bit because he's still doing his PhD. But he was very keen to take part, and his talk is fantastic, so we are happy to welcome him to come and join us. He's working with Matt Easterbrook and Pete Harris, and once apparently crossed Borneo overland and managed to contract typhoid in the process, and recommends it as a very effective way to lose weight.
Extremely effective. Can you hear me at the back? Hello. Am I going? I'm going. Right. Some work. All right. As Sophie Scott said earlier, no one said it would be easy. Education can be quite a slog at times, as I suspect some of you might know. But it provides tremendous opportunities in life for kids from all backgrounds, rich or poor. So it's a tremendous driver of social mobility. Or is it? Let's look at some numbers. School. You're half as likely to leave school with good GCSE exam results if your parents are on a low income. University. You're half as likely to go to university if your parents are on a low income. And that drops to a quarter as likely to go to one of the top 30 selected universities in the country. And that drops to a 15th as likely to go to Oxford or Cambridge. What about work? Take doctors. Doctors, I'm told, have to have some sort of rudimentary education before they're let loose on us. Only 6% of doctors describe themselves as having grown up in a working class background when they were kids. So the fellow in the beard was right. The fruit of education is sweet, but mostly if you're not poor. Education is meant to be a great leveler, but it isn't. The social mobility ladder is broken for kids from poor backgrounds. Now, there are well-known reasons for this. Big structural issues like poor kids have less access to better schools. And those are really important, but I don't want to talk about them here. I want to talk about another reason, which is very powerful, but hidden. Now, I'd like you to do something for me. I'd like you to remember yourself when you were a teenager. Some of you might find that more of a stretch than others. Now I want you to imagine that your parents were only just coping financially. So they were maybe working long hours in low-paid jobs, maybe multiple jobs, maybe they're in benefits. And you look around, your friends and neighbours, it's the same. Nobody in your social circle has been to university, is a doctor, anything like that. This is your world. Do you expect to do well at school? To get loads of A's and A stars in your GCSEs? Nobody in your social circle has, so why should you? What about your friends, neighbours, teachers, parents? Do they expect you to do well? Go to a good university, get a well-paid, satisfying job? Chances are they probably don't, and you know it. So the narrative that might be going on inside your head might be something like this. What might the narrative be? Let's think. People like me just don't do well at school. I really want to do well, but I don't stand a chance. Every time I take an exam, I'm thinking, here we go again, I'm going to get another rubbish mark. I'll never be any good, and my life is just mapped out right there in front of me. Now that internal dialogue is a result of a very prevalent stereotype that poor kids just don't do well at school. And there's a name for that. Stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is the fear that you'll conform to a negative stereotype that people have about you. It stresses you out, it makes you feel like you've got no control over your life, and it makes you feel like a failure. Basically, it's crap. And in fact, it's seriously crap, because research suggests that it could account for maybe 40% of the underperformance at school of kids from poor backgrounds. So what can we do? Well, psychologists have figured out something that can act as a very powerful inoculation against stereotype threat, and that's called values affirmation. A values affirmation is where you reflect on something important in your life. So it could be a good friend, a family member, your religion, football team, your love of dance. Something important in your life that is really good and solid. So a mother who's your rock, or the feeling of sheer exhilaration when you dance. Now this helps kids from poor backgrounds see school with more perspective, as part of a larger sense of themselves. And they start to go beyond the stereotype and feel more like individuals with a rich set of resources, both within and around them. They start to gain confidence in themselves, start to gain a sense of agency in their life, and they start to do better at school. So a couple of years ago, nobody really knew if values affirmation could help poor kids in schools in England, so I tested it. I ran a study with 561 secondary school students aged 11 to 14. Now, half of them, chosen at random, spent 20 minutes 3 times throughout a school year writing about something important in their life. So this gave the poor kids a sense that they were more than just their stereotypes. But it was only 3 lots of 20 minutes. It was only an hour over an entire school year. So did it make any difference? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the end of year scores in maths tests for the kids who didn't do the values affirmation exercises. So as you can see, there's a fairly substantial gap between the poor students and the better off students. It's a half a standard deviation, which is around 11% in an exam. So fairly substantial, but it's broadly in line with what you expect from the national picture. What about the kids who did do the values affirmation exercises? Well, for the better off students, it didn't really make that much of a difference. But they didn't need values affirmation because they weren't suffering from stereotype threat. So what about the kids from poor backgrounds? For them, it made a big difference. They closed the gap with their better off peers by almost 3/4, from 3 20-minute exercises throughout the whole school year. And more than that, the values affirmation significantly reduced the amount of stress that the kids from poor backgrounds experience. So what's next? Well, it looks like we've got a super cheap intervention that's really effective for kids from poor backgrounds in school. But this is just one school, in 1 year, in one age group. So let's see if the benefits of values affirmation and interventions like it can be replicated in different contexts in different schools across the country. And if they can be replicated, let's get schools using them. Let's start dismantling the barriers to the life chances of some of the most disadvantaged kids in our society. Thank you.
I got quite emotional. Thanks, Ian. That was brilliant. Any questions for Ian? Over there. He's going to invent that biscuit at the tea break.
What's the mechanism of change? Is it that they're trying harder or they're trying harder in the lessons? So something like maths is very fact-based, so it can't just be, or is it just a lack of, being not stressed? So that might help you to acquire facts in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and we've got some clues as to what the mechanisms are, but this is an area of very active research. So one of the mechanisms does seem to be stress. So when you're faced with an exam and you're thinking, I'm not going to do good because I'm from a poor background, it stresses you out. So all this stress uses cognitive load and introduces cognitive load, so you've got there's not much mind space to actually work on the problem at hand. The mind space is taken up on the fear of doing badly. So that's one of the mechanisms. But there are others as well, and that's why it's a very exciting area of research, because we don't really understand it very well yet.
So do you think that this value affirmation intervention could be used not only for pupils from low income backgrounds, but say that have suffered early childhood family bereavement or something like that, from advanced backgrounds as well?
Possibly. I don't know if there's been any work on that. This comes from the States, where the original studies were based around ethnicity. So it seemed that the most powerful effects in the States were for Black and Latino students, because they faced the negative stereotypes. In terms of other like negative life events, I'm not sure that could be an interesting area of research.
So have you gone back and looked at them and seen whether it lasted for longer than a year?
That's a fabulous question. That's what my ethics review that I just got approved yesterday is doing. This was 2015-16 academic year for kids who were 11 to 14. So the 14-year-olds are doing in that study are now doing their GCSEs as we speak. So I've got a follow-up study over the next 3 years, which will get their GCSE results. So that'll be between 3 and 5 years after the intervention. there's evidence from the States that gives us hope that it might actually show up in GCSE results. There was one experiment study that was very similar to this one, that 9 years later, after interventions similar to this, 9 years later it was showing increased grades and increased applications and selection to selective universities.
Because this could be like a vicious circle
Yeah.
as well. If they start doing well, then
Yeah.
they'll start thinking more positively about themselves as well. So.
Yeah, and not only that, not only do they start thinking more positively about themselves, but teachers and parents do. So expectations rise. So they then get institutionally onto different tracks. So they don't go into remedial classes, they go into classes that prepare them for university. So there's a whole series of environmental consequences to this very, very apparently very simple, but actually extremely powerful interaction.
So does anyone look at what they write? I mean, is it the writing down more than hearing or than thinking someone else cares about what I think?
I've not studied that in this, but one of the moderators could be the amount of engagement that they have in the writing exercise. So a very simple metric for that I'm going to use in future studies is how many words did they write in those 20 minutes? And we're going to see whether, if they wrote more words, whether that meant a larger effect. But the actual content of what they wrote, I'm not sure, and that might be, again, another area that could prove fruitful research. But I don't know.
Brilliant. Right, thank you very much, Ian, and thank you to all the speakers in this session. I think it's been absolutely brilliant. I think every talk has been amazing. So thank you.